My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. This is a lecture on the American architect Louis Kahn, given for the fourth semester of the required Architectural History and Theory course in spring 2014. We're going to talk this afternoon about the architect Louis Kahn. So this is how I'm breaking it down about Kahn, architecture at the time he's beginning his career, looking at his buildings, asking a question, where does architecture serve, and then ending with looking at Kahn's philosophy. So about Louis Kahn, and this is extremely abbreviated. So Kahn was both a practitioner and a teacher. He taught at the University of Pennsylvania in the 60s. His studio was here and there, but eventually he settled in the Fisher Fine Arts Building, or then known as the Furnace Building, in an upper space up here, and taught a master's studio. So you spent 1 year with Kahn. That was your master's degree. He was also a practitioner. Now, if you think about it, an architect like I.M. Pei is only a practitioner. He does not teach. An architect like Peter Eisenman both teaches and is a practitioner. So you can sort of think, which architects have chosen to do one or the other or both. Now we're going to put Kahn in the context of something called the Philadelphia School. So what happened was that the University of Pennsylvania was a Beaux-Arts school. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it got to be, after World War II, it was being kind of late to be a Beaux-Arts school. And the students organized, went to the president and said, this has to stop. And so they brought in a new dean in 1951, G. Holmes Perkins, and he was able to put together a totally new school. And the school is, 80-90% its faculty. So he was able to gather a remarkable faculty, most famously Louis Kahn and Robert Venturi, but these other figures as well who, when you download the slides, you might want to look some of them up. Now, two other things were happening at the same time, and that is Philadelphia had been suffering from 60 years of corrupt political rule, and finally the ruling party was thrown out by a reform government, and so the city went into renewal spiritually and architecturally and city planning-wise, and a new profession emerged. These young architects who were just out of school or just out of the army were, after World War II, were beginning their practices, and a whole new practice developed. And the three, the school, the practice, and the city, were in a unique synergy, so that all the design projects at the school were located in the city. The City Planning Commission used the faculty as consultants for their projects. The head of the City Planning Commission was on the faculty. There was every kind of integration you could imagine. The architectural approach put architecture in the context of a broad cultural orientation, saw history as a physical and ideological continuum, was very interested in the urban context, very sensitive to where the building was placed, and saw plan as a generator of meaning and structure as an ordering element. And again, when you download these slides, you can look at this in more detail. So here's one slide on Kahn's biography. Born in Estonia and came to Philadelphia when he was 5. So he's essentially an American. Grew up poor in Philadelphia and thought he was going to be a musician, and fell in love with architecture and went to the University of Pennsylvania, which was a Beaux-Arts school at the time. And the chief critic there was Paul Philippe Cray, very important figure, and his buildings just show up everywhere. We'll look at two of them. Kahn graduated in 1924, just when the Beaux-Arts was fading. He was totally not exposed to modern architecture, never mentioned in school. But one of his classmates was the first American to go to Europe and work for Corbu, and brought back all these books. And so Kahn says of the 1930s, I lived in a city called Corbu. Now, after he graduated, the country entered the Great Depression, and there was not a lot of work. So Kahn is a very late bloomer, and his early buildings were extremely undistinguished. So he had a Beaux-Arts education. The principles that you understand from the École des Beaux-Arts adopted for American schools. And we can say objectively Penn was the best Beaux-Arts school because the Beaux-Arts system worked on competitions. All the best student projects were sent to New York to the Beaux-Arts Institute for a competition, and Penn won more medals than the other schools. The chief critic was Paul Philippe Cray. This is a beautiful little building, the Pan Am building in Washington, D.C. It's right across from the Vietnam Memorial, if you're looking for it. And then later, in the 1929, he does a Shakespeare Folger Library, also in Washington. Kahn was the chief architect on that, and it's in a style called strip classicism. Beaux-Arts is trying to respond to modernism, and it doesn't work, and eventually gets thrown by the wayside. This is one of several examples we could look at of extremely mediocre buildings by Louis Kahn in the 1930s. So, our takeaway. Kahn was educated in the Beaux-Arts tradition. He struggled to convert to modern architecture. Lots of architects did. There's a whole school of architecture, the architects, for example, of Rockefeller Center were all educated in the Beaux-Arts tradition. How does America make this change from Beaux-Arts to modernism? Did initially undistinguished buildings, and he was very committed to Philadelphia. So, context. As Kahn's career comes into blossom in the very late 50s and then early 60s, what was going on? Well, you've been covering that. You could make that a very long discussion, but I'm going to hyper-simplify it that Mies was the dominant architect of the time. So, as I like to say, Mies was a lion standing in the path of all the architects. How do you deal with a lion standing in your path? You can surrender to it, you can deviate around it, just pretend it's not there, or you can wrestle with it and attempt to defeat it. And so SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, works within the Miesian tradition. So this is the Lever House. It's actually before Mies's Seagram building, but Mies was doing glass skyscrapers already in Chicago. And so you can work within the Miesian vocabulary. You can just ignore it. So Aerosarin and the TWA terminal is just doing something totally different. You can wrestle with Mies. And so Paul Rudolph has a very macho attitude. He's going to be more Corbu than Corbu, throwing around the concrete forms, bush hammering the concrete to make it even more aggressive than Corbu's, and challenges Mies with references to Wright and Corbu. The plan of the Art and Architecture building at Yale by Rudolph is Frank Lloyd Wright's Larkin building, and then the concrete is Corbu's. And Kahn takes on Mies. Kahn's medical towers that we'll look at first go up almost at the same time as Mies's Seagram building, and Kahn says in a famous radio interview, the Seagram building is like a beautiful woman in a corset. You want it to be hanging out there. And so where are the diagonal bracings, the air ducts, the elevators, the shafts, the mechanical, you don't see any of it. And so that's going to be Kahn's challenge to the Miesian position. He also challenges Mies's notion of being, seeing it as timeless rather than rooted in its time. And we'll only touch on that later. So, takeaway here is Kahn comes, matures. His first important building is done when he's 60. So, if it takes you a while to get up to your stride, it's happened before. And in fact, 1951, he does the Yale Art Gallery, which was a respectable building. It was a good building. But when he was trying to get a job, Vincent Scully, who was the famous historian teaching at Yale, said, Lou, face it, you're a great teacher. You're never going to be an architect. When he was 60, it started. So Kahn wrestles with Mies, but ultimately Kahn will do something very different. So that's what we'll see. So now let's look at Kahn's buildings. And again, very brief. We can sort of start with the Trenton Bathhouse. So Kahn had a commission for a big community center, and it had a bathhouse and a swimming pool. The bathhouse got built, nothing else. But here in this tiny little rinky-dink cinder block building, it's really in bad shape. He starts by rejecting Corbu's 5 points, the key one being the column grid. Corbu wants to break away from the bearing wall, which defines your spaces, and proposes instead a column grid, which means the walls are not bearing and therefore are free to go anywhere. And Kahn's going to reject that. He makes a famous drawing where he shows a bed right here, like spanning between two of these. He says you cannot sleep in two rooms at the same time. If these columns have an implication, there's no division between here and there, but there's an implied one by the structure being here. Maybe it sets off the lecture from the audience, but this means something. You can't just, Corbu imagined the columns could become points and essentially disappear. Kahn is going to make the structure the ordering feature of the building. So in this little bathhouse, just where you change into your bathing suit going to the pool, these forms here are the structure. They're huge and they're very defining. And then he emphasizes that definition by these pavilion-like roofs. So, our first important building is going to be the medical towers. Now this has a very long name, the A.N. Richards Medical yada yada yada, which, forget it, it's the medical towers. And there's actually 2 wings to the building. All we need to know is medical towers, 57 to 61 in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. And here you see this articulation that we did not see in Mies. Mies is putting the skin over it, and Kahn is letting it all hang out. And we're going to see that this articulation is not arbitrary. Where does it in fact come from? So, here again is Mies putting this, fitting everything into the skin, and here is Kahn making everything bulge out. Now, backing up, modern architecture stated the aesthetic should come not from the application of historical references, like sticking Roman columns on the 42nd Street Library, which is a steel building, but rather the aesthetic should come from an honest expression of the spaces, the structure, the materials, and the mechanical. Nobody had ever done it though. This was the implied statement, and then Corbu does a tile building and covers it with stucco. So you have no idea how it's working. And Kahn says, everybody's been saying this, I'm going to actually do it. So there's 2 wings to the building, this one and then this addition. We're only going to talk about this. This continues the same theme. So what we have is 3 pavilions. The bottom pavilion, the pavilion on the first floor here is knocked out, so this becomes the entrance. So, but on a typical floor, we have 3 pavilions served by duct space, stairs, and they're all linked into a central core. So let's see how he arrives at this arrangement, this very articulated arrangement. He starts by saying, what is science? How does science work? And he says there's 2 parts to science. There's measurement, where you work with test tubes and you gather information. And you want to have your lab tables, you want to be in flexible space, you want to have free flexible space not interrupted by columns or anything else. But there's a second part to science. So scientist then takes this information and goes to the light. Kahn likes to talk this way. And think about what does it mean and come up with the theory that explains this data that was gathered. So there's measurement, and then there's something that transcends measurement. That he then dedicates this area around here against the windows. Okay, so we've got our initial layout. We now need our structure. We don't want any columns inside because we want this all to be free and flexible. We don't want any columns in the corners because this is going to be our open to the view. So we're going to put our columns on the 3rd points. And then we're going to span it. So we put a member here that cantilevers out, and we put a big girder going across here and going across here, etc. So that's our structural system. And we've arrived at this totally logically. Now, we need air ducts and fire stairs. And we don't want to put that in the middle the way we do in a core of an office building because we wanted our middle open and flexible. And we don't want to put them in the corners here. That's where our views are. This is what's left. So this becomes the fire stairs and the exhaust ducts. our intake ducts are here, and so you need 2 fire stairs. There's a fire, you run out of here and go down the fire stair. But if the fire's right here, then you need a second means of egress. It's actually over here. So we've now got that, and then we actually have 3 of these addressing the square footage of our building. And we have the central services, storerooms, elevators, toilets, the other means of egress, etc. So we've arrived at this building through these very logical steps. It's not just arbitrarily putting bumps on an otherwise smooth building. Now, how's it going to build this? Well, the structure is all precast, pre-stress, post-tension. So cranes come along and assemble these pieces. Does that remind you of anything? Very strong, dominant structural forms, precast and put together like a giant Lego blocks. Hello, we're in one. Right there. These are giant precast columns dropped in here. These beams are precast, they're brought in. So you guys weren't here yet, but when this place was being built, it was really wild. And it went up really fast. The structure just went right up in like a couple of weeks because it was all precast, and these big flatbed trucks come in, crane picks them up and puts them in. Finishing it off took a while longer. That's exactly what was going on here. So here are our columns. They're in pieces, 1 story each. And then here are the beams that cantilever. These guys, not even going to, this was a mistake. These guys shouldn't be here. He says, that never should have done that. And in the next wing, he doesn't do that. They're just sort of cut the span down a little bit, but he didn't have to do that. And then the towers are poured in place concrete, and the rule is, University of Pennsylvania, every building has to have brick. That's the aesthetic unity, so they then have brick veneer on them, and he later is very regretful of that. So here's the crane bringing these pieces in. We drop down 2 columns for our next floor. We then drop down one of these guys, spanning across. We got these big girders going in, and then these little X things go in, the one that I said shouldn't be there. Here we are diagrammatically. We have this giant girder going across, big monster. There it is. Then we go going the other way. This one has to be in 3 pieces. Now we got a problem. How can you have a girder in 3 pieces? It'll just collapse. Well, it's going to collapse in tension, and the tension is done by steel in concrete, reinforced concrete. So once these are set into place and they're held by scaffolding, we then thread the rebars into this, going across all these holes lining up. The rebars go all the way through, and then we put hydraulic jacks on here that spin down nuts, like when they take the tire off your car, go but we're doing this so you make this building, you thread it with rubber bands, and you pull the rubber bands all taut. That's how they made this building. Architects were coming from all over the world to watch this thing going up. And then they'd go over to see Venturi's coffee shop, which was, also like, that's a cool architect also. The engineer for this is August Komendant, who was the leading precast engineer. Now, everything I just told you about how the structure works, every time you walk into the building, come up these steps, see this pavilion here, he scoops it out, and this is the entrance. Come up these steps, you look up, and the whole story I just told you is there. Kahn says the building is the record of the making of the building. Now, if you're not an engineer or an architect, you might not get all of this, but because this is a biology research building, but Kahn believes subconsciously you will, that this will make a kind of deep sense to you. Now, he's just as thorough about the mechanical. In a laboratory, the mechanical is half the budget, half the square footage, and half the cubic footage. And Kahn hated mechanical. So he says, I'm not going to run away from it. I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to confront it. And so part of the mechanical is the air. So we've got at the back of the building, that's what these towers are here. He usually calls them nostrils. This is a botanical garden. So the clean air comes in, up these tubes into the mechanical room with the giant blowers and fans and everything, down, and then into one of the laboratories, and then after it gets contaminated by the biological work, is exhausted out, incinerated and exhausted out this elevated tower. So if it's got these two slits, it's a stair. If it doesn't, it's exhaust air. Now, this building was very thoroughly studied. And there are three major problems came up, actually four, but start with three. Number one, scientists said, you know what? We would have preferred if this had been one continuous, I've got part of my team here, part of my team here, I'm running back and forth. This should have all been one big space. Number two, Kahn leaves all this structure exposed. There's no way he's going to have hung ceilings. He says, you're not going to put cardboard in my building. Dust gathers up there and filters down into your test tube. And number three, in response to the cantilever, the structure gets thinner as it cantilevers, he opens this up to glass. Too much light gets in, kills the bacteria in your petri dish, and so the scientists are taping newspapers and aluminum foil on the glass. That is really embarrassing to an architect, taping aluminum foil in your windows. You screwed up. So a new building was built, really undistinguished architecturally, just down the walk for the scientists who couldn't work in here. Now, Kahn became fully aware of these problems, and his next building was the Salk Institute for Jonas Salk. So Jonas Salk had developed the vaccine to prevent polio. Polio was a terror. Imagine the height of the AIDS epidemic. That's what the polio epidemic was like. And mothers were scared to let their kids go out in the summer to get polio, and then you'd be crippled or even dead. And Salk develops a vaccine, stops it just like that. So he becomes a medical superhero, and able to parlay his stature into funding for a laboratory, an independent biological research laboratory. So it's not associated with a school, and it's not associated with a big drug company. And it's in La Jolla, California, over the cliffs over the Pacific Ocean. He sees a lecture by Kahn, says, I want the medical towers. Kahn says, you're not getting the medical towers, you're going to get your building. So we've got two wings, and we have the laboratory floors, 1, 2, 3, and now our structure is much deeper than what we saw before. Those girders were much deeper. They're so deep that you can actually walk around them here. And so there's a floor here and a ceiling here, but this is a floor if you're walking around in here. There's so much space in here that all the mechanical goes in here. So now if you need, say, chilled water here, the engineers can thread it up here and then drop it down to your desk. Now remember there's one other problem, where I said the scientist goes to the light at the perimeter. Well, there's always more demand for space in a building than had been planned for. And now I'm eating my sandwich at the window, and someone else is 3 feet away, doing their biological research. So here we go out of the building. Let's go here. Here's that structure. These are giant verandales, important place of Verandale. Same engineer. Go out of the building, up these little steps into here, and in here are the studies for the scientists. So the offices are totally separate, and then the mechanical that we saw before are in these bumps back here. So this has stairs, toilets, and air ducts. So here are these offices. Here are 4 of them. There's a lot of structure for 4 faculty offices. And walkways in between. This is angled, this concrete. This is poured-in-place exposed concrete, which Kahn would not have done in the Northeast. Actually, he does a little bit, but concrete can really get chewed up. But this is California, so it never freezes. So he can use exposed concrete. But these things are angled for your view to go to the Pacific Ocean. And then we had these exposed wood teak shutters for the offices. And here's the mechanical floor, lab floor. Mechanical floor, lab floor, and 2 more below grade. So this is what the laboratories look like. Here are columns, giant verandales above. And just here, this is the mechanical, well, okay, this lab floor is right here. And then the mechanical floor is right here. And here's a little piece of this Verandale in there, this guy here. Verandale is it's vertical instead of diagonal. Should have got a better picture to see more of this. But you can see all the backup stuff stuffed in here that you need in a lab. And then this wall is floor-to-ceiling glass. And then the light part coming in, this walkway here overhangs the laboratory. See it overhanging. So that shades the sunlight so it doesn't get into the lab. So he solved, and finally, let's go back here. These two buildings, the medical towers and this one, are the exact same square footage. And so he's got 1, 2, 3 times 2, 6 lab floors where he had 21, or 20 if you take out that entrance in the other one. So these lab floors are 3 times as big as they were in the other building. He's addressed all of the complaints. It's really great when you get a do-over as an architect. And then, very famously, the Mexican landscape architect Barragan was supposed to do the landscaping for the courtyard. He came and he said, just leave it. It's a reflection to the sky. And so it's just a band of water running down the center, and here's the Pacific Ocean. Now, Kahn uses the term form and design. Form is the underlying order of something. It's not shape. Design is the shape. So form is universal. Design is circumstantial. Design is, okay, what's the site like? How many square feet do we have? Now, the circumstances might be so restrictive that we have to, this form ain't going to work. We got to get another one. But usually Kahn starts with the form, the organizing principle, and then makes it work with the materials, the site, and the other circumstances. The medical towers and Salk are totally different designs. They are the same form. So here is the scientists in the laboratory, the going to the light to work on your theory, going to the light to work on your theory, now in these little offices. The mechanical stairs and air ducts, mechanical stairs and air ducts. And then the common stuff they all share, the common stuff they all share. So these buildings share a form, but they have different designs. Next building we'll look at is the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. And here, Kahn adopts a B, and C, D, C, D, C, D grid, and gets a series of vault forms. I'm not going to use the word vault because that's a structural term, and structurally they're not vaults. Very famously, they have a slit running down the top to bring light in. We'll see how that works in a minute. So this is an art museum, and Kahn was very inspired by, throughout his career, he was very inspired by Rome. But he liked the idea, you come in and there's all the art. So you have this much concession to the lobby, and then bingo, right when you're there, you start seeing the art. Very powerful use of materials, cast in place concrete, infill with travertine. Now, this is not travertine structure, it's block, masonry block with travertine surface. So it's travertine, space, block, travertine. So you always need a space in a masonry wall. The roofs are covered with sheets of lead. These very primal, powerful materials. And he wants to show us the bolts that held the formwork. Architects would typically want to cover that over, and Kahn wants to leave those exposed. The vault shape is a cycloid. Cycloid is what you get if you take a bicycle wheel and put a bright light on it in a dark room, and then roll the wheel, and you will get a cycloid on an a photographic exposure. And that turns very vertical, so it's good structurally. It brings the structure down, minimizes outward thrust. And here you see he's alternating a people space, and then here is a mechanical space. So he's using these alternating forms to get his mechanical in here. Here are the air ducts, which then let fresh air in here. He wants natural light, but you can't let ultraviolet touch a painting. It'll eat it up, bleach the pigments. So here's ultraviolet filter, light comes in, hits this reflector, and is washed down this concrete interior cycloid. And Kahn has exposed, poured in place concrete here. Typically that looks like sidewalks. And this is supposed to be an elegant museum. So Mrs. Kimball, who had written the check during construction, comes and he looks up and says, "Oh my God, we got an ugly building." Because you never know, some architects just repeat their things, so you know you're going to get your building to be the same as the last one. Kahn's always doing something totally new. So, and the moment they put these reflectors in here, it's aluminum with perforations in it. So some light comes through the perforations and some gets reflected and washed down. It just looks absolutely beautiful. So it really worked. Now, a couple buildings I'm not going to talk about other than two. You should be aware of them. The Yale Center for British Art, you should know about because it's a quick train ride or drive from New York. It's at Yale, so you should go. If you go, you get the treat of another Kahn building right across the street, right here. And so he makes this giant frame in concrete, reminiscent of the giant oak frames of British manor houses, and then infilled with sheets of oak. A very strong grid that says where you put the temporary partitions, and that's as far as we're going to go. And again, a building I'm not going to talk about, the National Assembly building in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And we should know about this building because it's very prominently featured in the best movie about architecture ever. This is a documentary about Louis Kahn by his son, and the National Assembly building in Dhaka is very strongly featured. So when you see that movie, you will find out more about this building. Another building I won't go into is the City Office Tower. Doesn't look like Kahn's other work, very different. Kahn for many years was associated with an architect named Anne Ting. She just died about a year ago. She had a major, huge show at Penn and of all of her work. She was, to use a word, a geometry freak. She just loved all kinds of geometric exploration. So he's building, the platonic solids and stuff like that. And so we see here her influence in the geometry of City Office Tower. And another building I won't talk about, but you should know about because it's right here. So as soon as it's spring, you want to go over there. This is the FDR Memorial on Roosevelt Island. So you go up to just near Bloomingdale's. You can get on the cable car tramway and go over to Roosevelt Island. And it was designed in 1972, never got built, and finally a few years ago they said, we're going to make this happen. So it just opened a couple months ago. So, our takeaway for Kahn's buildings: a rejection of Corbu's column grid, a plan as a generator of meaning. The rooms are in dialogue with each other. Where you put the rooms is a statement about the relationships to each other of the activities in those rooms. The structure is a giver of order. The structure doesn't only hold up the roof, the structure provides the order for the building. And typically in Kahn's buildings, the columns are maybe 4 times as big as they have to be. You would think that there's a 20-story building sitting on top of this. There's just a roof deck up there. That's where we have hamburgers, graduation. So this is this big as a giver of order as opposed to structural necessity, and that comes from Kahn. Rediscovery of the centers of buildings. Centers of buildings were rejected in modernism as hierarchical. Kahn brings them back. Clarity of function, as we saw in the medical towers, clarity of materials. There's a lot of instances where Frank Lloyd Wright fakes it, hides things, shows something that actually looks the same, but it's two different things. Kahn would never do that. Everything is always clearly delineated. And articulation over integration. Given the choice, right here, this is a poured-in-place concrete tower, sheathed in brick, which is an exhaust. He could have used this to hold up the building. He didn't need these columns. He could have made that be the structure as well. No, this is mechanical, this is structure. And he wants to articulate and differentiate between them. Now, a little bit of architectural political politics. Where does architecture serve? This is a project Kahn did, Mill Creek Housing. It's public housing. You know, the kind of place where you have gang violence. And this is one more building by Kahn. So Mill Creek Housing was done at the same time that he was doing the medical towers. And cities were trying to, let's get some, good architects to do public housing. And here's Kahn thinking about, well, he's got these precast slabs in here, in the low, it's low, mixes low rise and high rise. In the low rise, he's got these precast slabs. They project out, provide sunshade, a la Corbusier. Here they project out and make balconies, giving these buildings articulation. Okay, so many years ago, and this before they dynamited this thing, one of my students, it's Kahn, I'm in Philadelphia, I should go over there. And he takes his bike over there, and somebody stops and says, "You crazy? Get out of here. You're going one more block and you're not going to get out alive." So these things were disastrous, and they were socially totally misconceived, and architecture wasn't going to save them. And they have been dynamited all across the country with the exception of New York. New York housing is so well run that it actually works. It hasn't worked anywhere else. In Philadelphia, they've taken down all of them, not just Kahn's. Very famously, what's the famous one that began the whole taking them down? Pruitt-Igoe. So if you haven't seen it, look it up. You can see a film on YouTube. Now, Kahn began his career during the New Deal under Roosevelt. He organized architects' committees for the progressive New Deal ideals. And he believed very much in the social program of modern architecture to make better world, better lives, better cities, address poverty, etc. This is his commitment to that, and he turns away from it. This is one more building. It looks kind of boxy, but wait till we get inside. This is the library at Phillips Exeter Academy. And here is his apology for using brick as a veneer on a poured-in-place concrete structure. It's like treating brick like it's paint. Bricks built in Rome. You don't use them for paint. And so here he has, the brick is structural. Now it's not really brick, it's masonry, because it's brick, block, space, brick. So you never have a solid brick or masonry wall. You always need an air space. Our air space is right. So brick, then block, then space, then brick. So I spent a day with the engineer who oversaw a major rehabilitation of the building. They had to change the flashing. It was a huge multi-year project because the building's 50 years old. And he says, today we want it brick, space, block, brick. Because the space is where you collect and get the moisture out. So we want to get the moisture out as soon as possible, not let it get all the way into the building. But anyway, notice something here. Look at how thick this is, and look at how thin this is. At each floor, this gets thinner because it's carrying less, it's structural, and the angle allows it to, this is actually an arch. It's wedged in as an arch, so there's an angle here to hold this arch. So this is very consciously a structure, very influenced by Rome, and by using the brick structurally, it's his apology to brick for what he did here. And then inside, there's this spectacular space. So we go up, this is a 19-foot deep X structure here. And so the light comes in through these windows here, bounces off this and down into the space. So we have this central space here. It's a brick building on the outside, concrete on the inside, and every surface you touch is wood. You never touch brick or concrete, with one exception, the main stair, and there you touch travertine. So here's all the wood for where you would be leaning on here or going, looking into the courtyard. So the building has a central court surrounded by the bookshelves, protected from the sunlight, and then around the outer edge are the study carrels. And everybody who photographs it goes here, and the students, the student has their own, and they've got it taped up with pictures of friends and animals and, all kinds of notes. And so the photographers always take that off to photograph it, but it's really cool. And so here's your little study carrel tucked in here. And then here's this giant window above lighting the space and your own little private window. And this is a sliding wood shutter. So the sun starts coming in, you can just pull the shutter and cut it off. And then the outer material is brick. So this is brick, this column is brick, and the span from here to here is brick. Then when we come in, and he shows that hatched. Then when we come inside, it is black, because that's concrete. So it's a concrete building sheathed into a brick building. It's like a double donut. And Kahn starts by saying, in a library, there would be a place with great tables on which the librarian can put the books, and the reader would take the book and go to the light. Here's one of these study carrels with all the stuff stuck up on here. The photographer didn't take them off. Okay, where does architecture serve? Does architecture serve social and political policies? Or is architecture the manifestation of institutions that are the embodiment of human desire? Leave that for you to think about. So to wrap up, Kahn's philosophy. And Kahn was a very powerful philosophical mind. And there's where to attack Kahn's approach. And a lot of ways to do it. I decided on this one. Start with monumentality. Monumentality is the celebration and form of a past that we value and feel is still living in us. So here is John Russell Pope's National Gallery, which is a reincarnation of the Pantheon. And it says, we in our culture today, 1941, 38 to 41, are still rooted in Rome. And we celebrate the Roman values. Our literature, our culture, our philosophy, our laws are based in Rome, and we want to celebrate and remind ourselves of that. So the Beaux-Arts vocabulary was Roman, which had Greek origins, as extended to the European Renaissance and Baroque. It said that we are Greek, Roman, and European in our origins and continuing in our culture. Modernism totally rejects that. The program of modernism was to make a new human being in society, to reject the past and European culture. European culture is seen as negative and should be done away with, and to create a universal materialist culture rooted in science, not the past. Therefore, it rejects monumentality. So I have here Walter Gropius's Bauhaus building, which is an excellent example for a couple of reasons. One is there's nothing Roman about this. There's nothing Beaux-Arts about this. It's purely functional. It's laid out according to what's going on inside, which I won't stop to say because we should be wrapping up here. But in addition, Gropius famously locked up the library in his office. They were running a revolution against this dead European academic art and building from new first principles. So basic design at the Beaux-Arts begins with point, line, plane, volume, and then texture, color. And then everything you can make in form is made from those elements. And so the rejection of monumentality is articulated by the architectural critic Louis Mumford. If it's a monument, it's not modern, and if it's modern, it can't be a monument. Now, during World War II, the architects start to think, wait a minute, what are we fighting for? Why are we having this war? We're having this war because we are defending certain values. We apparently value something enough that several million people should die for it. Well, what are those values? And, so they start to rethink this monumentality thing. And Kahn struggles with monumentality for a while. And he says something really lame. He says, we should find a new monumentality, the monumentality of the hospital, the school, and the daycare center. Really? It somehow doesn't make it. And so he struggles with this for a while, and then suddenly in his writing you see the word monumentality disappears. He never mentions it again. And a new word comes up, and that is order. So Kahn agrees with the other modernists in rejecting an imitation of the past, but he does not accept modernist materialism. He pursues a third way, order. So it's not monumentality, a rootedness in the European past, that modern architecture was lacking, but order, which is a rootedness in its own nature. Now we're going to be very abbreviated here because, actually, if you really want to go into detail, you can read my book. So I wrote a book precisely about Kahn's philosophy, Between Silence and Light, but he begins with order. Order is the underlying principle behind all things. Now, remember we talked about Chinese architecture, we said the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The Tao is the underlying order of all things. You can't say what it is because it's beyond concept. And that's what Kahn means by order. And he says, eventually I stopped and just said order is. You can't say what it is. Now, how do you describe something that you can't describe? Something you can't describe directly. You use a poetic metaphor. So he uses the metaphor of silence and light. Silence is the realm of potential where things reside until they are brought into realization. Aha! And now I suddenly have an idea. So anything that you can realize has to have had the potential to be realized. It was residing in the realm of silence. And you bring it into realization, but that's still just an idea. Finally, you got to make it in material, whether it's lines on the paper or bricks on the footings. And he says silence, the immeasurable, desire to be. So that's in this realm, you can't measure it. It's just desiring to be manifest. Desire to express, source of new need, meets light. Light is the measurable, giver of all presence, by will, by law, the measure of things already made. And the threshold between these two, what brings something from one to the other, is art. And he says of light, I said that all material in nature, the mountains and the streams and the air and we, are made of light, which has been spent. And this crumpled mass called material casts a shadow, and the shadow belongs to light. So if we look at this column here, the column is where the light stops and then condenses into material. On the paper, the black line that you draw, it's going to be the wall, is where the light is not on the paper. And so he's playing between a poetic and a real meaning for light. And then we manifest it in material. And materials follow these orders. It says if you think of brick and you're consulting the order, you say to brick, what do you want, brick? And brick says, I like an arch. If you say to brick, arches are expensive and I can use a concrete lintel over an opening. What do you think of that, brick? Brick says, I like an arch. So Kahn began every project with a question, what does this building want to be? Now, let me just digress and say, I'm going to give you Kahn's implied definition of architecture. Architecture is not about space, not about materials. Architecture is the art of institutions. Every building you can think of is for an institution. A house is for the institution of residence. A hospital is for the institution of medicine. A laboratory is for the institution of science. University building is for the institution of education. Kahn says there are four great desires. Desire to come together, leading to the community square. Desire for well-being, leading to the church, and two more. And all institutions are then particularizations of these great human desires. And it's our desires that define us. Animals have needs. Human beings also have desires. So, what does this building want to be? The client comes, we want a school. So, Kahn gathers around with his class. He would bring all of his office problems to school, and everybody would discuss it. What does this want to be? Oh, maybe a school is a place that's good to learn. It wants to be a place that's good where it's good to learn. Isn't that obvious? Well, whether you have a kid and you're taking the kid to a new school for the first time, and you look at the building and say, does this building look like it's a place where it's good to learn? If not, it failed. It doesn't matter what the square footage is or whether or not it leaks or how good they did the details. Does it fulfill this initial question? And so that's what he says about a library. A library is a place, he says, I never found a book in a card catalog, which today would be the computer. So I walk in the stacks and I see a book and it speaks to me and I take it off the shelf and then I go to the light. So that's his idea of a library. Now, this philosophical approach of Kahn, I'm going to suggest that it's not unique to Kahn. It's exactly the same as what Louis Sullivan said. So Louis Sullivan wrote 3 books. The last one is A System of Ornament According to a Philosophy of the Powers of Man, something like that. And on the last page is this diagram. And he says, this is a seed, this is the germ. Imagine you split open a peanut. So this is the part that's going to grow. This provides the food until the photosynthesis gets going. He says the germ is the real thing, the seed of identity. Within its delicate mechanism lies the will to power. Now, what's will to power? Well, he says it's the function which is to seek and eventually to find its full expression in form. In other words, the acorn wants to be an oak tree. So in that acorn, in that germ, is this will to be the oak tree, the school, the library. This is what Frank Lloyd Wright said. What is honor? Not the rules of the code, but the nature of honor. What would be the honor of a brick? That in the brick which makes the brick a brick. Now, this is implying a certain philosophical position, namely essentialism, which is extremely not popular in the social sciences these days. So these guys are holding essentialist positions, and you can look into essentialism and see how you feel about it. So, takeaway on Kahn's philosophy. There are parallels to Sullivan and Wright, parallels to Platonism and Taoism, this idea that the form is in an ideal realm and is then manifest in design and the circumstances in the material world. That's very close to Plato's notion of the ideal forms. Now in Kahn you see, I likened Silence and Light unto 2 brothers, realizing that there were not 2, nor even one. And you find almost the exact same thing in Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. Archetypalism, again, this is this notion of the ideal form, which then gets manifested in circumstantialism. Creation comes from within, not from without. So I didn't really go into that, but it opens his philosophical position. He begins with, I felt, first of all, joyous. I felt that joy must have been in all things, in the ingredients of our making. So that rather than spirit coming from without, in the biblical tradition, God makes man out of clay, and the clay is dead. And then God breathes the spirit of light from without into the dead clay, and it comes to life. In Eastern traditions, that spirit is inherently in all things, and that's Kahn's position. He presents his philosophy as a genesis from order to materials, and architecture is the art of institutions, which are the embodiment of human desires. So, 2 quotes. A great building must begin with the unmeasurable, must go through measurable means when it is being designed, and in the end must be unmeasurable. And a work is made in the urging sounds of industry, and when the dust settles, the pyramid, echoing silence, gives the sun its shadow. Thank you.